When looking at the most mobility demanding movements or positions in the gym, exercises that challenge your range of motion to a greater degree than anything else, we're gonna have to consider the snatch and the overhead squat. In this video, I'm gonna show you one mobility exercise that you can implement into your warm-ups, your daily routine, or even your mobility training protocol that's gonna have a drastic influence on the deep squat position and the overhead position at the same time. But there's a catch. It's incredibly challenging. I mean, as it should be. We're talking about mobility training here. This should never feel easy. So we're gonna have to look at some scaling options here as well. We call these squatting thoracic extensions, but I wanna spice them up a little bit and really challenge that overhead position. So we're gonna be adding in an unloaded overhead press for a little razzle dazzle. The way I see it, both the squat and the overhead position are just a collection of various biomechanics coming together to create a movement pattern. For the sake of this video, we're just going to analyze the deep squat position, but just know that this concept applies to any movement pattern or any position, including the overhead. Which actually has me curious. Tell me in the comments below which one you struggle with more. Do you struggle more with the deep squat or the overhead position? Do you have tighter hips, ankles, knees, or do you have tighter shoulder, thoracic area? So when we're dissecting the deep squat position into its individual biomechanical joint functions, we're gonna see that the ankles are in deep ankle dorsiflexion, the knees are in deep flexion, the hips are in internal rotation as well as flexion, and we can also look at the position of the pelvis as well. The crazy thing is that when one of these joint functions isn't moving the way it's supposed to, the stress that it's supposed to take on during the movement pattern is then going to be forced to be dispersed elsewhere in the body and move on to another joint that can handle it. Take a second to think about where you feel tightest in your body. In this case, we're analyzing the squat. So when people feel tight in their squat pattern, they often address their hips with stretching or whatever other mobility technique that they think is going to help, when in fact, that's not going to provide them long-term results because they're simply addressing the area that is taking on more of the stress as opposed to addressing the root cause of the issue, which is the area that is limited, forcing that stress to be going onto the hips. Now, if we take a step back again and look at the independent biomechanics that are involved in the squat, again, ankle dorsiflexion, knee flexion, hip internal rotation and flexion, then we can address all of those independently with our exercise selection, or we can also address those globally by applying the deep squat position as a whole. So continuing on with that concept, the global approach, let's mobilize the overhead squat position by using the overhead squat. So now I'm gonna demo the exercise for you, but before we do, if you struggle with the deep squat position, which I'm assuming you do because you're here, you may need some plates to help prop up the heels a little bit. All right, so we're gonna start off by getting into our deepest ideal squat position. When I say ideal, I'm referring to your squat stance. Don't mobilize or work in a squat stance that doesn't feel right for you. That doesn't make any sense. If you want to improve your deep squat position, you need to actually make sure you are standing in your ideal stance. So make sure you do that. So getting into my ideal squat stance, from here, I'm going to cup my hands behind my head and get into deep thoracic flexion as my starting position. Now I'm going to open up my chest and pull my elbows back and squeeze my shoulder blades together and look straight ahead out in front of me. This position itself should be very challenging. And from there, I'm going to press overhead without losing my position and hold for a count of 3, and then bring my hands back behind my head and come back to starting position for a little rest. And that's 1 rep. So again, you want this to be very challenging and you want to train an upright vertical torso angle. So we want to try and avoid being here, working on it. You want to get that nice upright torso position. So again, I'm working with flat heels. It can be quite challenging to work down here for you. So if it is, that's where you're going to elevate the heels. If that's easier for you, that's where we want to be working. So again, from here, same concept, thoracic flexion, pull the chest out and pull those elbows back, squeeze the shoulder blades, press up. Notice my torso angle is very vertical. The elevated heels really helps with that. Come back to the start, pulling your hands behind your head again, and then back to the starting position. And that is another rep. So every time we're pressing overhead, we want to hold for a count of 3. We really want to spend more time in the positions that we are trying to improve. Now, if this is still too challenging for you, elevating the heels, still too challenging for you, you can always work it a little more passively by holding on to something out in front of you and just doing a single arm variation at a time. Both are gonna work well. You're really challenging and trying to spend more time in that deep squat position and really working that overhead reach as you are down there. So it's really training the full body mobility in one go. Remember that mobility training really is just another form of strength training. The principles are relatively the same. So treat this exercise like you would any other accessory exercise and show up with intensity. Intensity, that's gonna make a huge difference in how much you get out of this movement. Hey, as always, if you have any questions about your mobility, drop them in the comments below and I'll be sure to hop in there and show you the way. And if you're serious about improving your mobility, check out this video here, or here. I'm not sure where I'm gonna put it. Thank you for joining me. It's always great to have you here, and I'll catch you on the next one.